Picture this, 1938, America, nighttime. Millions of people turn on their radios, and they hear that Martians have landed on Earth. People run out into the streets, wrapping their faces in wet towels. In one village, they start shooting at a water tower because they thought it was a spaceship. A radio drama? Yeah, but the people who panicked couldn't tell fiction from reality. The question isn't whether those people were stupid. The question is, would you have been able to tell the difference? Because in a few minutes, you're going to learn something about your own brain. About how an ancient survival mechanism makes smart people, just like you, make the dumbest decisions when they're in a crowd. And yeah, it's not magic, it's chemistry. Today, we're going to talk about panic. About why a crowd is both the smartest and the dumbest organism on the planet. Why, when we get together, we're capable of brilliant collective decisions, but then a second later, we can tear apart the very person we chose as our leader. We'll break down the mechanics, the neurobiology of fear, the social psychology of contagion, historical examples where panic cost thousands of lives, and most importantly, we'll understand how they use this to control people. Who and how uses the chemistry of your brain to make the crowd go exactly where they want it to. Get comfortable. This isn't a horror story. This is an instruction manual for your own mind. Here we go. Let's start with a simple question. What even is panic? In everyday language, we use this word all the time. I panicked when I realized I forgot my keys. There's panic on Wall Street over inflation news. I'm panicking about my exam. But from a scientific point of view, panic is something much more specific and much more ancient. Sigmund Freud gave a surprisingly accurate definition. He said that panic is collective fear so massive that it loses touch with the real threat. Notice that wording. The key part is loses touch with the real threat, meaning panic isn't a reaction to danger, it's a reaction to the feeling of danger, a feeling that your rational mind no longer controls. Imagine a herd of antelopes on the savannah. A lion approaches. The antelopes take off and run. That's not panic. That's a reasonable response to a real threat. Their brain, or whatever antelopes have instead of a brain, worked exactly as it should. Danger. Run. Totally logical. Now imagine the same antelope bolting because the antelope next to it sneezed, or because a branch fell, or because it thought it saw something move in the bushes. And then it knocks over other antelopes. They get up, and the whole herd stampedes into nowhere, just because everyone ran, so I ran too. That's panic. A reaction that's totally out of proportion to the threat. Why is panic rare? Researchers who have studied mass disasters made an unexpected discovery. You know what they found? Real panic actually happens very rarely. Take 9/11. When the planes hit the Twin Towers, what did people do? They didn't run in panic, shoving each other out of the way. They walked down dark stairwells, in an organized way, methodically, helping each other. The ones who made it out described a surprisingly calm evacuation. Or take the famous Iroquois Theater fire in Chicago in 1903. That was real panic. In 8 minutes, over 500 people died. An eyewitness wrote, "The heel prints on the faces of the dead silently testified to a brutal fact. Human animals, gripped by terror, are as mindless and merciless as a fleeing herd." Why do people stay human in one situation and turn into a herd in another? The answer is simple. Panic happens when people feel there aren't enough exits for everyone. At the Iroquois Theater, the set caught fire. The flames spread instantly, and the exits were narrow. People realized, if I don't get through first, I'm going to burn. The human part switched off. The animal part switched on. At the Twin Towers, the stairwells were wide. People believed they had time, and they acted like human beings. So, the first thing to understand is this. Panic isn't just fear. It's fear plus the feeling that a resource is scarce. Scarcity of time. Scarcity of space, scarcity of a way out. A study of bank panics in the 19th century found an interesting pattern. When depositors started to suspect a bank was going to fail, They ran to pull out their money. Classic panic. But researchers found that women closed their accounts more often than men, and people with kids more often than single people. The most vulnerable maids, laundry workers, factory workers, seamstresses were the most likely to close their accounts, even if they lost part of their meager savings. Why? Because for them, losing that money meant hunger, a real threat to their lives. Their panic threshold was lower. So, panic isn't just crowd stupidity. It's a biological survival mechanism that kicks in when the ancient part of your brain, the part we share with antelopes, decides the situation is critical. But the really interesting part starts when that mechanism kicks in for thousands of people at the same time. And that brings us to the main paradox. We intuitively believe that a group of people is smarter than one person. And there's some truth to that, but it's not always true. So how does it happen that a crowd can be both brilliant and idiotic at the same time? Imagine an old-fashioned fair. There's a crowd in a square. A huge ox is led through. The challenge: everyone has to guess the weight of the ox. Whoever guesses the closest wins a prize. Most people are wrong. Someone says 300 kilos, someone says 800, someone says 450. But if you take all the answers and average them out, the average turns out to be almost exactly the real weight of the ox. This phenomenon is called the wisdom of crowds. Individuals are wrong in different directions, and the errors cancel each other out. This works when three conditions are met. First, people don't know the right answer and are honestly trying to guess. Second, people don't talk to each other, everyone answers for themselves. Third, opinions are diverse. In that situation, the crowd really is smarter than any single person. Now let's look at a different experiment. It was done by psychologist Salem and Asch in the 1950s. Imagine you come to a lab. They show you two cards. On one card is a line. On the other card are three lines of different lengths. Your task: say which of the three lines is the same length as the line on the first card. It's such an easy task that if you're alone, your error rate is less than 1%. But in the room, besides you, there are several other people. They're actors, but you don't know that. And they start giving obviously wrong answers. All of them, one after another, pick the wrong line. What happens to you? About 30% of people go along with the majority at least once, even though they can see the answer is wrong. And 75% give in to the pressure at least once. People are willing to change their perception of reality under pressure from a group, even when it's something as simple as the length of a line on a piece of paper. This experiment shows the flip side of the wisdom of crowds. As soon as people start influencing each other, as soon as social pressure appears, the errors stop canceling each other out. They start amplifying each other. In real life, we rarely deal with simple things like line lengths. Information is usually complex, contradictory, incomplete. And in those conditions, we rely on other people as a source of information. If a lot of people are saying Tesla stock is going to go up, well then, it must be true, we think. If everyone around you is buying buckwheat, then there must be a shortage. If the news keeps talking about a threat, then the threat must be real. This works even without direct pressure, just by watching what other people think. It's called informational social influence. In the internet age, this influence gets multiplied many times over. In 2013, researchers did an experiment on a news site. They artificially gave comments either positive or negative ratings at the very beginning, and they found something surprising. The first reader was 32% more likely to upvote a comment if it already had a positive rating. Over 5 months, comments with artificially inflated ratings got an average of 25% more real upvotes. So even a tiny signal of social approval creates a snowball effect. People follow the crowd without even realizing it. In 2008, scientists at the University of Leeds did a simple but brilliant experiment. They gathered a group of people and asked them to just walk around a large hall. Don't talk to anyone, just walk in random directions, no leaders, no instructions. But a few participants were given a secret mission. They knew exactly where to go. The rest had no idea. What happened? It turned out that just 5% of informed people was enough for the whole crowd, all 95%, to follow them without even realizing it. People just subconsciously adjusted to their neighbors' movements, and gradually the whole group formed an organized flow in the direction set by that tiny minority. And when the researchers later asked the participants, "Did you know you were being led?" most of them honestly answered, "No, I was just walking." We follow the crowd without even noticing it. Our brain is wired so that other people's movements are an incredibly powerful signal. If everyone's going right, there must be a reason, even if we can't see that reason ourselves. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes total sense. For ancient humans living on the savannah, the scariest thing was being alone. If everyone runs, you run, even if you don't see the predator. Because the guy who stopped to think could become lunch. Our brains are designed to copy the behavior of the majority. It improved survival rates for millions of years. The problem is that, in the modern world, this ancient mechanism often works against us. So now we come to the main question: what happens in our brains at the moment of panic? How does biology turn us from rational people into part of a frantic herd? To understand panic, you need to look inside the skull. Don't worry, it's not scary. It's actually kind of beautiful, like a complex orchestra where every instrument plays its own part. Inside your brain, there are several key structures that handle the response to threats. Scientists call this the fear network. And here's how it works. Deep in your brain, on both sides, symmetrically placed, are two small structures shaped like almonds. They're called the amygdala. That's your guard dog. It doesn't think, it doesn't analyze, it doesn't build logical chains. Its job is to react instantly to potential threats. When you hear a loud noise, see a sudden movement, smell smoke, that information goes first to the amygdala. And it triggers an alarm response in a fraction of a second, even before your cortex, the part responsible for conscious thinking, has figured out what just happened. There's a deep logic to this. If you wait for your cortex to analyze the situation, you might be too late. Predators don't wait. So evolution gave you the ability to react first and think later. Research shows that people with panic disorder have heightened amygdala activity. It's too sensitive, too alert, sees threats where there aren't any. Next to the amygdala is the hippocampus. It looks kind of like a seahorse. That's where the name comes from. It has a different job. The hippocampus tells the amygdala, "Remember this place? Last time it was scary here." Or the opposite, "Relax, we've been here before, it's safe." In people with panic disorder, the hippocampus often malfunctions. It can't properly assess context, can't say, "This situation seems dangerous, but it's actually safe." So the amygdala is left without brakes. The most human part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. It's located right behind your forehead. That's your inner adult, the one who says, "Stop, let's think about this." When the amygdala sounds the alarm, the signal goes to the prefrontal cortex, and the cortex assesses, is the threat real or false? Should we panic, or can we calm down? If the cortex is working well, it sends a signal back to the amygdala. False alarm, stand down, and you calm down. But the prefrontal cortex has a weakness. It shuts down under stress. When fear levels spike, blood drains away from the cortex and rushes to the ancient brain structures. Your body switches into fight or flight mode, and there's no time to think. That's why people do stupid things in a panic. Your inner adult just got turned off. The guard dog, your amygdala, is calling all the shots. It's important to understand, fear and panic are different systems. Scientists distinguish between two types of reactions. First, anxiety, a reaction to a distant, uncertain threat. For example, you're walking down a dark alley and you don't know what's ahead. You're on alert, but you're not running. Second, panic, a reaction to an immediate, close threat. For example, a figure jumps out of the darkness right at you. You run or you freeze. No time to think. In panic disorder, this mechanism breaks. A person can go into a panic without any external threat at all, just because their heart rate sped up a little or their breathing got tight. The brain interprets these physical signals as a threat and triggers a panic response. And why is this important for understanding crowds, you might ask? Imagine what happens when a lot of people gather in one place. Every single person has their own amygdala, their own hippocampus, their own prefrontal cortex. But when people are together, their brains start to synchronize. If one person gets scared, their fear can transfer to someone else. If another person gets even more scared, their panic infects the first person. Fear amplifies fear. Everyone's amygdalas start working in unison, in the prefrontal cortex, which could say, "Stop, false alarm." Stress levels are through the roof. And now the crowd turns into a single organism, an organism with no brakes. That's the chemistry of panic. Now that we understand the neurobiology, let's look at history. Because humanity has left us a rich collection of examples showing how panic spreads, how it takes over entire societies, and where that leads. In 1962, in a small boarding school for girls in Tanzania, something strange happened. It started with 3 girls who suddenly started laughing. Nothing was funny, they were just laughing, and they couldn't stop. The laughter spread to others. Within a few weeks, the whole school was laughing. They had to cancel classes. The school shut down. The girls were sent home. And then the laughter started spreading through the villages. In total, the laughter epidemic affected about 1,000 people and lasted more than a year. People laughed until they were exhausted, until they cried, until they couldn't breathe. Then it stopped, just as suddenly. Scientists still argue about what it was. Poisoning was ruled out. Most likely it was a case of mass psychogenic illness, where stress and social contagion cause real physical symptoms. Notice, people weren't just pretending to laugh. They were actually laughing. Their bodies were reacting. Because the brain is the body, and social contagion works on a physiological level. Here's another example. On the evening of October 30th, 1938, millions of Americans were listening to the radio. A dramatization of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds was airing. The director, Orson Welles, produced it as a live news broadcast, with cuts to news bulletins, eyewitness interviews, scientist commentary. People who tuned in late didn't realize it was a play. They thought Martians had actually landed on Earth. Panic broke out. People ran into the streets, wrapped their faces in wet towels to protect themselves from poison gas that the aliens were supposedly spraying. In the town of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, where the first spaceship landed according to the script, residents mistook a water tower for a spacecraft and shot it up with rifles. Later, it turned out it was just a radio drama. An investigation followed. It turned out that most listeners had been calm, but the ones who panicked acted totally irrationally. They just lost their ability to think critically. Why didn't they check other channels? Why didn't they verify the information? Because their ancient brain took over. If everyone around me is screaming about an invasion, the invasion must be real. This case is still studied in journalism schools as an example of the tremendous power of media, one radio broadcast, and hundreds of thousands of people in a panic. Let's jump to Europe. In the 1060s in Holland, something happened that's now called the first speculative bubble in history, the Tulip Mania. Tulips were brought to Holland. They were rare, beautiful, and there was demand for them. At first, collectors bought them, then rich people. Then people realized you could make money from tulips. Prices rose. People mortgaged their houses, sold their businesses to buy tulip bulbs. At one point, a single bulb of the Semper Augustus variety cost more than a house in Amsterdam. And then one day, in 1637, someone just didn't show up to the auction. Or they showed up, but didn't buy. Nobody knows exactly how it started. But suddenly everyone realized, wait, tulips aren't worth this much money, and prices crashed. Thousands of people went bankrupt overnight. The country's economy took a serious hit. What was that? Pure crowd chemistry. Fear of missing out drove people to buy. Then fear of losing everything drove them to sell. Both are forms of panic. The first one just looks like hype, the second like a crash. Before deposit insurance existed, banks were very vulnerable. If depositors started suspecting a bank might fail, they'd rush to pull out their money. In 1857, a panic started with the collapse of a large bank, the Ohio Life and Trust Company. Within a month, deposits in New York banks dropped by 12%. People lined up at night to get their money out. On October 14th, banks across the city suspended payments and didn't resume until mid-December. Such panics happened in 1861, 1873, 1894, 1896, 1896, 1996, 1997, 1994. Every time, the mechanism was the same. Rumor, fear, action, confirmation of the fear the bank actually fails. Even more fear. They were acting rationally given the information they had. If everyone else is pulling their money out, I need to pull mine too, or I'll lose everything. But the collective result of these rational actions was a bank failure that could have been avoided if everyone had just stayed calm. Now jump to the 17th century. In 1692, in the town of Salem, Massachusetts, a few teenage girls started acting strangely. They screamed, contorted their bodies, hid under furniture. The local doctor diagnosed them as possessed by the devil. The witch hunt began. The girls identified several women. Trials started. Some were hanged. Some died in prison. In just a few months, 20 people were executed. Later, it turned out the girls might have been faking, or they might have actually been in a state of mass psychogenic illness. But the main point is this: how quickly fear and hysteria took over an entire community. People who had been perfectly reasonable farmers and merchants just the day before were now sending their neighbors to the gallows based on teenagers' visions. Because everyone is doing it. Because you can't have doubts when it comes to the devil. Because fear is contagious. Salem isn't about religious fanaticism. It's about the chemistry of panic applied to an entire society. So we've established that panic is an ancient mechanism hardwired into us, that crowds are easily infected by fear, that social proof works every time. So the question remains, who uses this? Because any mechanism can be used. And fear is the most powerful fuel for controlling masses. In 2001, the day after the 9/11 attacks, the New York Times ran an editorial titled, "The Politics of Panic." It said that the Bush administration was using the smell of panic in the air to push through unpopular economic policies. That's not accidental. That's a technology. When people are scared, they look for a leader. Anyone who says, "I know what to do," they're willing to give up power just to feel safe. Politicians know this and actively use it. Create an enemy image. Stoke fear about an external threat. Inflate panic around immigration, terrorism, economic crisis. All of this works because it hits the amygdala directly. Try arguing with someone who's afraid of migrants by appealing to their prefrontal cortex with statistics, logic, facts. Useless. Their amygdala is already engaged. They can't hear you. They're scared. News channels exist for ratings. Ratings are driven by emotions. And what's the strongest emotion? Fear. The principle, if it bleeds, it leads, still holds. Count how much time in any newscast is taken up by scary stories versus good news. The ratio is about 10-1. News about terror attacks, disasters, epidemics, economic crises, it sells. It makes us watch, because our brains are wired to look for threats. We can't look away when they show a fire or a flood. That's not curiosity. That's an ancient mechanism. Watch and learn how to survive. The media creates a culture of fear. They don't just report events, they interpret them. And the interpretation always leans toward maximum drama. Going back to the beginning, remember Freud's definition of panic, fear that's out of proportion to the threat. The news constantly manufactures that kind of disproportionate fear because it's profitable. In the 21st century, a new mechanism for spreading panic has emerged. Social media. They work as an accelerator. In the old days, a rumor spread at walking speed, then at the speed of a mail coach, then at the speed of a telegraph. Now, at internet speed. A post screaming for help, a video of something supposedly dangerous, a meme that stokes fear, all of it can reach millions of people in a few hours. The problem is, social media has no editors, no filters, no one who checks facts before the information goes live. Everyone is their own editor. That means false information spreads just as easily as the truth. Even easier, because scary things always get more attention. The experiment with upvotes we talked about showed that the first rating heavily influences all the ones after it. The same thing happens with alarming news. One scared post sets the tone. Then the imitation mechanism kicks in, and a few hours later, the entire internet is in a panic. By the way, classic marketing move, creating artificial scarcity. Today only 3 left, and so on. Why does this work? Because it hits the same mechanism, fear of missing out. In ancient times, missing out on a scarce resource meant starving to death. Now it just means missing out on the new iPhone model. But your brain reacts the same way. After everything we've said, it might seem like panic is for the weak or stupid, that smart, educated, rational people are protected from these mechanisms. Not even close. Smart people panic just the same. They just have fancier justifications. You know who stock market traders are? These are people who make a living analyzing markets. They study for years. They know math, statistics, economics. If anyone should be protected from irrational behavior, it's them. But look at stock market bubbles and crashes. Who creates them? Traders. When everyone around them is buying shares of some company, even the smartest trader starts to doubt. What if I'm missing something? All these smart people are buying. That's fear of missing out, FOMO. When everyone around them is selling, the same trader thinks, I need to get out before it's too late. That's rational on an individual level. But collectively, it creates irrational bubbles and crashes. One of the scariest man-made disasters, the Chernobyl nuclear accident in 1986. It was caused by a combination of design flaws and panic. The operators, seeing that the reactor was behaving abnormally, started acting outside the procedure. They got scared, and in their fear, they hit the emergency shutdown button, which, in that type of reactor, actually triggered the explosion. These weren't idiots. They were highly skilled professionals. But in that moment of stress, their prefrontal cortex shut down, and they started acting on instinct. In psychology, there's a concept called the expert paradox. The more someone knows about a field, the more vulnerable they are to certain kinds of mistakes. The expert is sure they have the situation under control. They think, I know how this works. I won't give in to panic. And when a real threat arrives, they spend time analyzing instead of acting. And then, when the situation spirals out of control, they panic even harder than everyone else, because they understand the scale of the disaster better than the average person. Research shows that in a crowd, people with higher IQs lose more cognitive ability than people with average IQs. Why? Because they're used to relying on their intelligence. But in a crowd, intelligence doesn't work, emotions do. And that person is in a situation they're not prepared for. The person who's used to using their head loses their main tool in a panic. The person who's used to acting on intuition might actually keep their cool better. So intelligence isn't protection from panic. Sometimes it's a risk factor. So, we've broken down the mechanics. We've looked at history. We understand how manipulators work. The main question remains, what do you do about it? How do you avoid becoming part of a frantic herd? How do you keep a cool head when everyone around you is losing theirs? There's no universal recipe. but there are a few principles that might help. First principle, awareness. As the ancients said, forewarned is forearmed. Just knowing that you have an amygdala inside you that can take over, that itself is protection. When you feel fear rising, tell yourself, stop. This might be a false alarm. My internal guard dog is about to wake up, but I don't have to obey it. Second principle, time compresses. In a panic, time compresses. It feels like you have to make a decision instantly, but almost never is there a situation where you can't take a 10-second pause. Breathe in, breathe out. One more. Those 10 seconds give your prefrontal cortex a chance to turn back on. Blood returns to your cortex. You can think again. In most situations, a 10-second pause doesn't change the outcome, but it radically changes the quality of the decisions you make. Third principle, diversify your information. If everyone around you is screaming the same thing, that's a reason to doubt it. Find another source. See what people with a different point of view are saying. On the internet, it's easy. Just Google it. If it feels like the world is ending, check whether people were saying the same thing 5 years ago. They probably were. And yet, here we are. Fourth principle, find an anchor. In a panic, people look for something to hold on to. A leader, an authority, the majority. But you can consciously choose an anchor for yourself. It could be a specific person you trust. It could be a fact you've personally verified. It could be a simple rule: I don't make decisions in the first 10 minutes. An anchor gives you something to hold on to. It stops you from being swept away by the current. Fifth principle, distance yourself. Try to look at the situation from the outside, as if you're not a participant, but a spectator. As if it's a movie. What would you tell the hero of that movie to do? Probably something reasonable. So follow that advice. Distancing turns on your prefrontal cortex and turns off your amygdala. Because the amygdala only reacts to things that are personally about you. If you switch to, I'm not scared, I'm just curious, the fear fades. Sixth principle, physiology. Don't forget, your brain is part of your body. If you want to stay calm, your body needs to be okay. Breathe steadily. If you can, drink some water. Sit down if you're standing. Lean against a wall. Do something that signals to your body, everything's fine, we're safe. When the body is relaxed, the brain calms down more easily. We've reached the end of our journey. We learned that panic isn't weakness. It's an ancient evolutionary mechanism. We understood how the brain works in moments of fear. We saw how history repeats the same mistakes, from Tulip Mania to modern crises. We broke down how politicians, media, and businesses use fear to control crowds. And we talked about how you can protect yourself. But one question remains open. Who's running you? You might think you're a free person, that you make your own decisions, that no one can make you do what you don't want to do. Partly that's true, but partly it's an illusion. Every single day, a fire hose of information hits you. Every single day, someone tries to trigger your fear so you'll buy their product, vote for their party, click their link. Every single day, your amygdala gets stress tested. And the question isn't whether you'll give in. The question is, do you realize it's happening? Awareness is the only real protection. Not intelligence, not education, not social status. Only the awareness that inside you lives an ancient beast that can wake up at any moment. You can't kill it, it's part of you. But you can learn to negotiate with it. The next time you see panic, in a line, on the news, in social media, stop for a second. Ask yourself, is this a real threat, or is it just my ancient mechanism firing? Who benefits from me being scared right now? Ask yourself, what would I do if I couldn't see what everyone else was doing? The answers might surprise you. And remember, the truth is on the surface. Many just don't want to see it.